Beyond the deserts and the steppes, where rivers coil like silver serpents across the vast plains, there flourishes an empire of silk, bronze, and ink. Merchants and scholars travel the boundless roads, bearing jade, philosophies, and secrets. In stone libraries and palace halls, geographers unfurl painted scrolls of distant lands, tracing mountains like great teeth and rivers like living veins, seeking not only to measure the world, but to understand it. Hello adventurers, and welcome back to the Red Quills. My name is Ryan, and today we are discussing how you can create a map in the style and vein of the maps of the Han Dynasty in ancient China. Over the course of this series, which has been going for 2 weeks now, we've been exploring how different ancient cultures have mapped their understanding of the world. Today we are venturing far from Rome and far from Egypt over to the Chinese Han Dynasty to see how they mapped and understood the world. We will look at the maps that they made, their understanding of the world and their place in it, and how we can use the principles that they put into their maps and their artwork to create an artwork, a map of our own that seems like it's brought directly from their empire. I'm going to guide you step by step through this process, and we're going to come out with a project that looks like this. So, let's get started. If Roman maps were practical and controlling, Han maps were expansive and philosophical, where their Western counterparts were very concerned with order and organization. The Han maps that we have still present in the present do show us a worldview concerned deeply with philosophy, with natural landscapes, and an understanding of change in the world. So today we're creating not just a tool, but a worldview on paper. So, as we've gone through this series, I've used specific examples from history in order to inspire the styles of the maps that I've done over the past couple of weeks, using the Book of the Dead for ancient Egypt, using ancient mosaics for the Roman map. But for this map, I'm using 3 specific examples from history to inform not just the aesthetics of the map, but its content and understanding of the world. Starting with one of the most famous examples of Han Dynasty art, the Mawangdui maps from circa 200 BCE. They were unearthed from a tomb in Mawangdui in the 1970s, and they are one of the best preserved examples of ancient mapping techniques left in the modern day. And best of all, they have different kinds of maps there, from topographical maps to military district maps, and we're going to be using those as an absolute blueprint for what we should be doing in our map making if we want to bring our audience back into that time period and that worldview. Now you can see on them that the key features of the maps are the carefully drawn rivers, the mountains, the settlements. They are astonishingly precise for the time and date that they were created at. They rival even Roman surveying. But their style is soft, it's visually flowing, it uses a lot of curves. Rather than the straight line of session the Romans had, they worked with the landscape. They prioritized the landscape and their place in it, which is very interesting for an empire so illustrious and powerful. So, a fantasy Han style map will emphasize mountains, watercourses, rivers. It will have a curved, flowing style. It will prioritize the landscape over the empire itself. Now, much like the ancient Roman Empire, there is a great deal of art of the Han Dynasty that has survived to the modern day, and many of it is stonework or metalwork because that survives the test of time best. We are extremely fortunate to have the Mawangdui maps still intact today, but I'm going to be using a couple of pieces of Han art that I will base the aesthetics of the map on, such as this particular figure painting. I'm going to use the colors, the pattern, the use of proportion to influence the aesthetics of the map. The Mawangdui maps will give us the content of the map, the style of the map itself. The figure paintings are going to give us the aesthetics. And finally, I will use Chang Heng's cosmological theories from the 2nd century AD. Now, Chang Heng was a Han scholar. He wrote about cosmic geography. He was a polymath, much like you would get in ancient Rome or even the Renaissance in Europe. He explored a great deal about mathematics, art, and philosophy. And the idea that the Earth was this sort of flat square underneath a spherical heaven dome was one of his major influences. So he emphasized throughout his works the idea of balance. He emphasized the concept of cardinal directions and had a real trend towards centrality. His philosophy was focused on the fact that there was a central point towards everything. And we're going to be using that for the map making techniques as well. Because a fantasy map can very easily reflect his philosophical ideas. I mean, particularly, the geographical idea of a flat plane beneath a curved dome. But more than that, the idea of having these cardinal directions, not only physically, but spiritually. The idea of centralism in a map. The idea of, carefully ordered borders, but symbolic centers is something that we can definitely bring to a map of the Han Dynasty style. All right, I'm going to take us step by step through the process of creating a map in the style of the Han Dynasty. And what we're going to begin with, as always, is a blank A2 sheet of paper. Now, as always with this series of maps, what I'm going to begin with first is sketching out a rough draft using pencil. Once I've placed the borders and I have a fair understanding of what the content of the map is, I'm going to make sure that I have all the details and I focus on what the map will emphasize overall. Now, because we're using the Mawangdui maps, I'm going to be emphasizing the physical landscape, as I mentioned earlier, but I'm not necessarily going to be using those, topographical forms of mountains, which are very popular now, or even those sort of long flowing triangles that are really shown in the Roman or the medieval or the Egyptian style of map. The Han Dynasty maps, particularly the Mawangdui maps, have this specific form of curved line, which we can really use to emphasize the topography here. So for this map, I'm going to be doing a map of my own world, rather than a map of the Han Dynasty itself, just so that we can show how you can put these principles into action in your own fantasy world, rather than, being forced to base it in reality, in history. So this is an area of my world that I haven't mapped before, which gives me a lot of freedom, but it is a large centralized continent. We're going to be following the idea of Chang Heng's philosophies there. We're going to have a decorated border on the outside to mirror the figure painting that was popular at the time, and we're going to use that topographical style that emphasizes these sort of curved mountains and many, many rivers to really follow the Mawangdui maps styles here as well. On top of that, on top of the natural landscape, I will layer these cities. I'm going to use large circular icons to show the cities that have political influence. I'm going to use smaller rectangles to show villages and towns. And I'm going to use a numbering system within the rectangles to show the relative size of the villages. All of the circles are the same size because they have political influence. But if I can use a numbering system like this, just a very simple one using notches to denote the size, so 1 notch is very small, 4 notches is quite large, then that can show the population density of each town, and we can show, while still maintaining this sort of aesthetic commitment to the landscape and to nature, that imperial priority of order and efficiency, that bureaucracy that is required to make an empire run, because we still want to keep that. The Han Dynasty, like all empires, did require a great deal of organization. It is just that philosophically they were more focused on nature and philosophies than the Roman Empire was. We were very orderly. So that being said, we have a draft finished up and we can move on to the next step. As with every kind of map that we do, we're going to start with prioritizing the major aesthetics of the piece, right? In this particular case, that means the watercolors, because I'm going to be using a lot of large colored areas in this map in order to give it a really strong reminiscence towards that figure painting style, all right? So what I'm going to start with is by doing the border and the continent in the 3 major colors. And because of that figure painting, I really want to bring that back to it. Not only am I going to use the pattern, but I'm going to use the coloring of it. The red, the black, and the gold. The gold is the highlight in the figure painting, or a whitish sort of color. I'm going to use that to bring the eye to the continent. It also saves me from having to color in the water. In the topographical maps from Mawangdui, the water is done very dark in dark ink. And I don't really want to make this painting all that dark. The continent is surrounded by water. So in order to draw the eye away from the water to prioritize the landscape, I'll use the yellow here. I will spend a little bit of time doing the decoration of the border. And it's not necessary for this style of map. It's not particularly important or relevant for a player who's going through, but it does ground your map in the aesthetics of the time. It does bring you into the world building. So I would recommend putting some effort into it. It's just not strictly relevant. So once you finish doing the watercolors, you can start coming in with some ink, right? I've used a series of thicknesses of Fineliner ink, all in black for this particular map, in order to show the various natural landscapes. So once we've done the watercolors, I'm going to come in, I'm going to draw the natural features, right? I'm going to start with the coastline and the major cities in a 0.6mm Fineliner pen. And once that's done, I want to emphasize the coastline to really draw the eye to it. And I know that in a lot of the fantasy maps of the Western world over the last several decades, you can see a lot of the sort of the wave characteristic. So those sort of thin lines, concentric on the coastline, moving further and further out. Because I want to show the coastlines, but I don't want to use a lot of ink like in the dark style of the Mawangdui maps. And I also don't want to be openly reminiscent of that kind of Western style. I'm going to reverse it here. Because the Mawangdui maps were topographical in their own particular style, they didn't use the style we have today, I'm going to use the concentric lines on the inside of the coastline, so that it gives the feel that the continent is rising up from the page. Because we in the modern day know how to read a topographical map, more or less. So that will give us the impression of shading around the outside. It does draw the eye to the coastline. You know automatically where it is. I mean, the coloring helps with that as well, but this also brings it back home. It allows me to tidy up that yellow outline because watercolors are less accurate than the ink pen is. And then I can move on to the major natural landmarks. I'm going to start with the mountain ranges and the rivers in a thinner style of pen, 0.4 and 0.2mm black Fineliner pens. Now you can see that I've emphasized the curves here. There's very few straight lines in the natural landscape because there is generally very few straight lines in nature itself. In their maps, in their art, they did tend to like to show curving from one place to another. And you can see in the Mawangdui maps that that is a real staple of theirs. Even if we, looking down on the world, think of mountain ranges as being fairly jagged, fairly straight, fairly, cracked, like a bolt of lightning. These are, snaking, meandering curves that have their peaks shown by these interesting little symbols that are quite rounded occasionally, but quite jagged, to show the landscape from the perspective of the person on the ground. And I really like that as a style here. I'm going to bring it back, and I'm going to use a very thin 0.05mm Fineliner pen to show the detailing within those symbols. And so after we've done the natural landscape, we can come in and we can do the human landscape, the human features. So we're going to add some humanity here. We've done the symbols for the major cities. I've got a couple of circles for the other continents as well. We're going to go through and make those rectangles more inked and fill them with those symbols, and then do the roads. In the Mawangdui maps, and I find this very, very interesting, the roads don't feel particularly accurate. And that could be an artifact of the map itself. It could just be that that is how they were, but they weren't very logically placed roads. But the level of exactitude that you don't get in the Mawangdui maps on the placement of the road really does indicate that they didn't consider that to be, particularly important, which is such a contrast to the way that the Roman Empire, focused on that network of roads. I find it absolutely fascinating. So we're going to really use that. The dotted lines that represent the roads connecting various towns will all be straight, and I'm going to have a secondary rule, which I did only come up with about halfway through, so forgive me for the inconsistency there, that they won't branch off each other. They only go directly from town to town, because what I'm not doing is showing their geographical placement on the map. I am showing the reader of the map which towns can be traveled to and from. Okay, so you're not looking for junctions anywhere along the way. You're asking, if I go from this town to this town, can I get there, or do I need to have another stop off on the way? And that is sort of my nod to their sort of laissez-faire about the placement of their roads. And so after that's done, we've placed all the cities and the roads. I'm going to come through and I'm going to label. So I've used this top to bottom calligraphic style of showing the labels and the titles. And it's a little bit cumbersome, but overall I think it definitely does give the impression of it being characters rather than it being letters, which is the intention I wanted to go for, even though I think it feels more Japanese than Chinese. But you know what? We're just figuring this out, guys. If you've got other ideas for how to do the labeling, I'd be very interested in hearing about them. I thought about doing them, you know, in boxed groupings, similar to the placement of Korean letters within their characters. All right, and once that's all done, I'm going to add in some finishing touches. Once I made sure that all the labels are done, I'm going to make sure that the other continents are labeled as well, highlight their relationship with the seas, the coastline. There aren't very many location names in terms of like the natural landscape. It's all just political names for the towns and the cities, which is philosophically, you know, not necessarily what they were on about. So I've gone through and added a couple more things. But for your maps, I think it's worth remembering that they had a focus on the natural landscape. So you can use this as I've done. The intention is of being an organizational map for the empire, for a scholar who's moving from place to place, rather than as, you know, an expression of their understanding of the world. Similar to the Roman map that I did, which is meant to be used by a legionary, this is meant to be used by a traveler, rather than just as, you know, a surveillance of the empire, which would put a focus on mountain ranges, rivers, and things like that. So that is the Han style map here. What have we learned today? Okay, so Han style maps prioritize philosophy and the natural landscape over the sort of political, the man-made artifacts of their time. So roads and cities are secondary to rivers and mountains, and everything has a sort of curved, naturalistic approach rather than the straight line priorities of their Western counterparts. We've used colors to draw the eye to the continent. We've practically ignored the water itself. I've used strong colors and shapes to be reminiscent of the figure paintings from the Han Dynasty to really bring that aesthetic back to life. And I've used this sort of flowing character style script, top to bottom, to really bring that home and remind the reader that it is supposed to be based on Han Dynasty maps rather than Western maps. Overall, I'm very pleased with how this map turned out. I think it's one of the strongest in the series so far. What do you think? What could I have changed? What do you think I should have added or prioritized? I'm always very interested to discuss this. I am interested in what you would have done for the script. I think that that's the weakest part of this particular map. If you disagree with me, let me know in the comments below. But if you have another method, I'd be very interested to hear it. I'm going to be experimenting with different styles of writing for the rest of this series. We've got you know, the Mayan calendar map coming up, which in particular I'm going to be having a look at how I can use letters to represent, you know, symbols and characters. I've already had that problem with the Egyptian map, and we're obviously going to revisit it. So let me know what you think in the comments below. As always, your challenge this week as a map maker is to create a map in the style of an ancient civilization. Everyone has their own favorite. If I've already done yours, if you like Egypt or Rome or the Han Dynasty, then, you know, you can do one in the style that I've done. You can see what you can change up, add to it. Or if you have your own favorite ancient civilization that you want me to do a map in the style of, come and let me know in the comments below or on the Discord. The link is in the description below. As always, I am so incredibly grateful for the Patreon and members of the channel here. It's just absolutely wonderful to have this community. I'm so very, very grateful. And thank you all for watching this video. I hope it was helpful and interesting, because it was certainly interesting for me to make this map. There's always more to add to maps. I could work on this forever, but this one only took me about 5 hours. It was quite quick as these maps go, and it is A2. So if you're making your own smaller at home, it'll take you even less time. Let me know how you go. As always, I will see you next week for our next installment of this Ancient Civilization map making series. All right, I'll catch you then. Until then, happy mapping. But I digress. Very, very much. It's not that important, right? Don't overthink it. They're not going to kill you for... They might. All right.